breakfast and all ready for the day ahead. So thank you for joining us today in the session of how to protect, detect, and respond against the rise of ransomware. We're excited to start this session to share with you what we have prepared for you. But first things first, do note that we will be recording today's sessions. So for those of you who are unable to make it today, they can always catch up with the session. Also, we will be activating the chat box function for any Q&As that you might have. So you can state your questions within and we will answer them as best as we can when we come to the segment towards the end of the webinar. Okay, I'm going to start. So jointly organized by Privasec and Blackpanda, we bring together two industry professionals to offer greater context to the ISO and Cyber Trust Mark certifications, moving on to the cybersecurity roadmap for SMEs and discovering what you might not know, in which we will share some tips on how you can identify some common trends to look out for within the industry, leverage on frameworks to enhance your organization's cybersecurity maturity. So subsequently, we will be touching on elements of ransomware attacks, crafting your best moves to defend and orchestrate the best ransomware defenses. And here's some of the case studies that you can all learn from. So adding on, we would like to share a appreciation to AISP for supporting this event. As for formalities, I'll do a very quick introduction of all the panels. And myself. So hi everyone, I'm Arielle, Business Development and Marketing with Privasec and your moderator for today. I'm here to facilitate the session, and I've been here with Privasec for quite a while now, and I'm very interested in the cybersecurity space. It has been an incredible journey so far to be able to assist my clients, peers in protecting corporate information and efficiently, so secure better opportunities through achieving certifications and other amazing things that we do here in Privasec. Also from Privasec, we have Chen Heng, aka we call him Q, Regional Head of Privasec Asia. He also serves as an principal consultant of all of Asia's operations. Over the span of more than 8 years, Chen Heng has also provided consultation for technological business transformation with focus on offensive security and predominantly the technical side of cyber operations. He is also passionate in breaking things, and is very driven to solve hard problems. So as an entrepreneur active in his field of cybersecurity, he enjoys sharing the importance of cybersecurity with businesses and helping them align it with their business strategies. Going forth, we have Victor from Blackpanda. Victor has been running sales and business development for Blackpanda for quite a while now, a hyper-specialized digital forensics and incident response firm in Singapore. He brings with him over 10 years of top-of-funnel experience in the technology and infocom space. He's not only recognized for his stellar track record, but as well as frequent speaker in tech and cybersecurity events. So you'll get to see our faces at the end of the session during the Q&A, so we can get better acquainted then. So next, we have some agenda to cross off within the session from Q's end. We will be speaking on how to start on cybersecurity, strengthening business growth through different strategies, and starting off with Privasec's presentation. I'll leave it to you, Q.
Yes, can you hear me? Right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the session today. So as Arielle described, today we'll be talking about a little about how to think about cybersecurity within your organization, about the security frameworks that are out there. There are quite a few out there today. What might be the best fit for you, depending on the size of the organization and how you use IT. The zero trust paradigm, which is something that we hear a lot about, but there are so many interpretations of it. What does it actually mean? How does it impact you? And what we see is often missed within the cybersecurity space. So a common theme that we often talk about when it comes to questions around what should I do about cybersecurity is understanding our own organization's cybersecurity maturity. Where are we today and what are we ready for? There are many measures and paths to take to build cybersecurity capability within an organization. And at the end of the day, cybersecurity is here to support a business need. It does not exist on its own. So we're going to spend money and effort into building something up. The question is, what are we protecting? What are we getting out of this? So a common answer to how do we gauge cybersecurity maturity when we don't have a lot of internal resources to draw on is to rely on cybersecurity frameworks. Before we get into the details, let's take a quick look at the trends for the threats that organizations face today. So unfortunately, there are not a lot of good sources of information around cybersecurity threats. Most of the information we find out there today is quite US-centric. So the information I have here is from IBM's study about the average cost and frequency of data breaches by initial attack vector. That means how did the attacker originally get into the systems organization. Now, the dollar figures here are millions of dollars. The percentages there are the frequency. If you look from the top right towards your bottom left, the most common vectors are something that I think all of us have heard about at some point. Stolen or compromised credentials from data breaches, some of the tools that you might use, and you share passwords across multiple platforms, sometimes even your office or work email. Compromised or stolen credentials are used in what we call credential stuffing, where attackers would take known emails and credential sets and try them out over multiple platforms to see what actually works. Phishing, a very common attack vector, whether is it by WhatsApp, SMSs, email, whether the target is a corporate target or is it an individual. We have seen this happening a lot even in Singapore, especially with the episodes for SMS-based phishing. For example, targeting OCBC banking customers. Cloud misconfiguration, that was pretty common at one point, but these days we have CSV tools, we have tools that allow you to very easily scan your cloud setup for any misconfigured items. So I think this will probably go down over the years. And the last one we'll talk about today is vulnerability in third-party software. So vulnerabilities in third-party software, or what others might term third-party risk management, is something that's often overlooked. Whether or not it's a small software library you use in your code base, whether or not it's a function that you outsource, there has been a trend of third-party misconfiguration or breaches that led to your own organization being liable for loss of data. This has happened across anything from multinational corporations, telcos, CIIs to smaller firms. And as a supply chain interception, which is part of this, is also becoming quite a more common occurrence these days. So for example, the update paths for software being intercepted to insert malicious software. So looking at the threats that we face today and the initial attack vectors over here, what can we do to protect ourselves? When we talk about stolen compromised credentials, phishing, it's usually a process-based fix. You need awareness from the employees, you need awareness of your vendors who use your systems. Some of these can be fixed by software solutions, email-based scanning solutions, and so on. But all in all of these attack vectors require yourself to have a good understanding of the risk of the organization faces. What system do you rely on? What data is core to you or key to you that you cannot afford to lose? And according to that, what do we need to protect? So now let's talk a bit about security frameworks in general. So when we talk about security frameworks, a couple of names might come to mind. ISO 27001 or ISMS, that's a very common framework. NIST CSF, even our local cyber trust, cyber essential standards, all those comes to mind. But there are many standards out there and they're designed for different things. So we have seen people use these frameworks in an inappropriate manner where it's not really as effective as it should be. So the first one, maybe let's talk about control-based frameworks. So for control-based frameworks, they are essentially line-by-line procedures or line-by-line configuration items that you can choose to implement to secure your system. So this can be on an application or system level. For example, you're trying to secure a Apache server, or it can be on an application level where you go through minimum password requirements, things like that. So a few examples of for this out there: CIS, the Center for Internet Security, they publish configuration standards for a lot of softwares out there. So your databases, your web servers, even operating systems. NIST 800, the NIST 853 is one of the standards out there, as well as ISO 27002, which although it's not strictly a control framework, ISO 27002 provides guidance for a wide range of security controls that you can implement. So the downside for control frameworks is that they are better used as a guidance or reference standard. So for example, if I implement everything that's written in the CIS configuration guide, I would probably have a very secure system, but it wouldn't be the most efficient of systems, and some of these controls will not be necessary. So control frameworks, if you come across one and wish to implement them, are better used as a guideline or reference. Take a look through them and decide for yourself what you should or should not put into it, put into your own environment. So next we have program frameworks. So program frameworks are a lot more adaptable. Program frameworks are designed to help you set up a sustainable cybersecurity program. So it's all about creating an iterative system which you can run through periodically to identify things you need to fix that align with your business goals and how to go about maintaining this program. So common program frameworks, ISO 27001, is meant to be, these frameworks are a bit like a style guide. So for example, ISO 27001 itself is designed around what we call the plan, do, check, act model. It's an iterative design and management method. So it helps you identify the scope of what you want to protect. So maybe you would say, I handle PII, I have a transactional system. These are key. That's what I want to protect. What's the desired outcome and what kind of risk you are facing if these systems fail? So the plan, do, check, act model is around how do you plan what you need to do? How do you actually implement the controls? Controls in the sense of, for example, encryption of the database to protect the data, however, might lead to lower speed in your application. So there's always a trade-off. How do you check effectiveness of what you've done? And how do you act on the outcomes of what you've implemented? So how do you implement the full program and any changes that might need to be made? So this plan, do, check, act model can come in many different forms. The main standards that we see today are ISO 27001 and NIST CSF. So program frameworks typically require you to put a bit more resources, a bit more commitment into maintaining a continuous program. However, the upside of it is that they are not, because they're not prescriptive, they're not telling you you have to do A to Z. Instead, they're telling you this is how you set up a program to identify for yourself what you need to do. They are a lot more flexible. So we have seen 5-man organizations with that are ISO certified that are running an effective program, effective to their scale and what they can afford to do, keeping the business going smoothly. And it can also be implemented to multinational MNCs, right? So they're very flexible because they are they're designed to be this way. They're meant to support the business. And lastly, we have risk frameworks. So risk frameworks arguably is the most direct way to come up with a list of security objectives to implement that are business aligned. So common risk frameworks out there, you have your ISO 27005, you've NIST 830, and for quantitative frameworks, you have FAIR. Now for risk frameworks, there are some requirements you have before you're able to do them effectively. Because in order to identify business risk, I think most business owners, most people who are operating within a business are able to see it. However, how do these risks translate to cybersecurity risk? And how do you quantify this risk? Now, this is a harder question to answer. So if you wish to implement an effective risk framework, you usually would need someone who's able to provide those insights, be it an internal staff or be it an external consultant. However, if you're able to go through, for example, your core business operations, you're able to go through maybe the data flow of PII you collect from the landing page your marketing team has set up to the point where you review and you delete the data after 1 year of it no longer being used. If you can identify these critical business process flows within your organization and look at it from step by step, what risks do you face in this particular step? What can you do about it? Arguably, that would be the most cost-effective and business mission aligned approach to cybersecurity. And a lot of program frameworks actually have advocate for this risk-based analysis as part of their framework. So for ISO 27001, risk assessment is a large part of it. So now that we have taken a quick look at the frameworks out there, I think what would be helpful, another perspective around this, is what aspects of cybersecurity do we look at? So this identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. This is part of what are the NIST cybersecurity framework. So traditionally, when we think about cybersecurity, when we talk about how do we protect against something, what comes to mind would be things like firewalls, antivirus, setting up minimum password standards. Those will be the first things that come to mind. Low complexity, immediate things that we'll think of. The downside of thinking about cybersecurity in an intuitive manner like that is the tendency for people to think about cybersecurity only from an identification and protection point of view. So how do I identify threats? How do I identify what I need to protect? And how do I actually protect these things? So your antivirus, well, your firewalls, your minimum password standards, things like that, they all fall in the protect category. However, looking at the environment today, we basically have two types of attackers. You have attackers that attack according to opportunity, so the lowest effort and higher reward for them, and we have persistent threats. With how easy it is to conduct attack these days, you can no longer assume that just identification and protection is sufficient, because there's a good chance that every organization at some point will be hit by attack in one form or the other. Now it becomes a question of how do I detect, respond, and recover. If we base on the assumption that an attack is inevitable at some point, how do we actually detect an attack when it happens? How do we respond effectively? And how do we go back to business as usual? This becomes something that everyone will need to address at some point. And I think there's not enough emphasis placed on this in the typical small organization. So by looking at these 5 categories, we get a we'll get a way to adjust our perspective to cover the entire spectrum of things we would need to do. Now I'd like to introduce another concept here. So what you see over here on the left is what we call the zero trust strategy. So 8 pillars of Sekiro zero trust strategy. Sekiro is actually our parent company based out of Australia, and we follow the same principles here. So one term you might hear being bandied around a lot in the world today, in the cybersecurity world today, is the concept of zero trust. It's nothing new. It's something that has been practiced for a while now. However, it's introducing the paradigm of moving away the mindset of perimeter protection. While most companies have already shifted away or in the process of shifting away from that paradigm these days, the concept of perimeter protection is setting up a secure perimeter, which means it could be an internal network, it could be an application where you have a layer of protection around it. So this could be a firewall, this could be a 2FA authentication layer, it could be multiple things. However, once you go past that initial parameter, everything within that parameter internally is implicitly trusted. So for example, we relate this back to traditional cybersecurity. When we enter a house, you have a gate, you have a door. So that can represent your authentication layer. However, the moment you enter the door, you are free to roam throughout the house. If you look at the modern paradigm of how things work and how things are set up, with a lot of people using their personal devices like cell phones, you have applications and web applications running independently on the laptops where it runs through the internet, so you can't exactly control the network. You look at how we operate in the modern workplace, this paradigm no longer works. Instead of having only a gate and a door protecting the house, within the house itself, where you have the individual rooms, the doors within the rooms must also be closed. Each of these rooms, the doors are essentially a checkpoint to make sure people are allowed to access the data of the systems that they should be allowed to access. So to put this into perspective, these 8 categories, from a people perspective, it's important to foster a culture that creates threat awareness, resilience, and risk identification. From a perspective of identities, multi-step authentication and verification of users on an ongoing basis, not just the parameter, is important. From an analytics standpoint, real-time monitoring across all your systems to understand interactions and anomalies. From an infrastructure standpoint, protecting key infrastructure from data exfiltration or misconfiguration, regardless of where they are within your systems. Whether is it at the perimeter or it is within the internal network. And for data, end-to-end protection of data. For some organizations, this might mean when the data hits your internal application server, the connection between the application server and your database server, even though they are considered protected in the network, this connection must also be protected properly. From a network perspective, of course, there's a traditional isolation and segmentation of networks where if you're in network A, in the internal network, you cannot ping network B because these two networks are meant for different functions. And then for applications and endpoints, it's the protection of these applications and endpoints, regardless of location, operating system, user, and being able to catalog and perform risk assessments across the functions and the data they manage. Now, so this paradigm is not strictly a framework. You can take your zero trust paradigm, apply it from a ISO 27001 perspective. You can also apply it under the CSA Cyber Trust framework. It's just a matter of adjusting how you view cybersecurity and what you would deem sufficient to your working environment. So for the zero trust architecture, I think it's particularly important that we keep that in mind, because in today's context, where a lot of applications on the cloud, where a large number of the workforce is working remotely and probably still working remotely post-COVID, as well as from a perspective of data sharing and the data privacy and compliance point of view, the implicit trust model no longer works today. So today's session is a little shorter. I'm going to end it off with some of the commonly overlooked aspects of cybersecurity governance. So from the studies that are published out there, from observations of the clients we have, the most common things we see that are overlooked even today can fall into these three categories. So the first is vulnerability and risk management, and including third-party risk. So whenever we use a tool or external vendor, how far do we go in assuring ourselves that the data we hand over to the vendors or we upload to these tools for use is being handled securely? That's not something that's always being kept. Managing critical data, managing, for example, PII. This is another aspect of cybersecurity governance that is not always well taken care of. Do we actually know, for example, if I have a marketing team creating a WordPress landing page, from the moment individual enters his PII to the landing page, where does the data go? Where does it flow through? Is it stored in a repository where everyone in the organization can access? Is it passed at some point to external organization for their analysis? And do we actually retain the data or remove the data after a certain period of time? Lastly, incident preparedness and response. So this point is related to something I mentioned earlier, where focus tends to be around detection and protection, and not so much around the assumption that everyone will be attacked at some point. And when we are attacked, however low the probability is, because of how impactful that would be, we need to be sufficiently ready. So these three items, I hope, would be a good takeaway from this short session today. And lastly, obligatory advertisement slide. So Privasec is a cybersecurity consulting firm based out of Asia and Australia. And if you have any needs around governance, risk compliance, certification of standards and assessments, do reach out to us. And with that, I shall end my portion of the presentation. I'll hand the time over to Arielle and Victor.
Thank you, Q, so much. So deciding on the house and eventually reaching desired organizational security goals is really an essential goal for all of us here, like many of us here. So thank you for elaborating, Q. And from what I'm hearing, it seems like the breakdown of what you have shared will be relevant to what will Victor be sharing on our next segment. So here's to you, Victor, from Blackpanda. He'll be sharing more on incidents, response plan and retainers, types of incidents, best practice, and etc. Over to you, Victor. Thank you.
Thank you. Give me a sec. Let me set up my slides first. Okay. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Many familiar names here. Thank you. My name is Victor. Once more, I'm responsible for business development for Blackpanda Group. So you might have already heard Q's conversations about risk prioritization, some frameworks, as well as how to improve your cyber posture. However, we all know that there's no magic pill with cyber defenses, right? So now I'm going to logically segue into incident response, right? Followed by the importance of risk transfer. So let me move on to my next slide. Okay, so first and foremost, before I go into details, let's breeze through what we are collectively seeing right now back at home. Okay, so these are excellent data here, right? I'm not going to run through each and every of the infographics that you are seeing here. You would have probably seen this many times now, talking about how ransomware is on the rise, cybersecurity is of a concern, of course, right? So let's bring our lenses back to Singapore. All right, I've spoken with many organizations, IT managers, SMEs in the regions, and many times when I talk about incident response to them, right, the first response to me is, nah, right, I'm too small to be targeted, right, I'm just an SME. And yes, there's really nothing wrong with that statement, right? Small organizations may not be targeted, right, but 2 points I'd like to drive across here. Attackers are using spray and pray techniques, right? You might not be on a crosshair for all we know, right? But criminals might be taking random shots at random groups of enterprises and, right, seeing who will end up paying off the ransom willingly. Secondly, and most importantly, think of the possible collateral damage. Okay, what if it came through an infected email network of your supplier, right? What if the attacker is using you to get to the bigger fishes, right? Your MNC clients, possibly. So what you're seeing on screen right now is published by our very own Business Times. And if you take a look at the bottom left, right, many times we choose to pay off the ransom, all right? We choose to rebuild a new house, which is your network, right, on the same plot of land. But we fail to recognize that the secret tunnel, right, on how the attacker got in to begin with is still below where your new house is built on again, right? So I'm going to give you a better physical analogy in my next slide on what ransomware is all about and what ransomware response is all about. Okay, so ransomware, right? Ransomware at the simplest form, I think all of you might already know, it's a malicious software designed to block access to systems until obviously money is paid. So for today's agenda, main agenda for today's sharing is going to be ransomware response and what are your options out there. But before we go into the technicalities, right, this is going to be very interesting. Let me put ransomware response in better perspective using a physical analogy to help you paint a better picture. Okay, so just imagine this, that's my home, right? Imagine one day, right, I step home, I find a ransom note, right, on the table. It says, wife kidnapped, please pay $1 million in ransom. Okay, what am I going to do next? This is a typical K&R kidnap and ransom case, right? Which I'm going to correlate that into cybersecurity in the next couple of slides. So obviously the first thing I'm going to do is that, hey, I'm going to call my wife, right? Check my family, check with her closest friends, right? To find out if she is indeed missing, right? And if those do not work, who should I be calling next? Obviously, logically, it's going to be the police force, incident responders, right? I won't be fumbling around Googling for help, right? I'm going to call the police to get help right away. But before we do that, before that, right, before the responders or police come into play, okay, what would I be doing, right? Would I then place a call to the kidnapper? Would I demand to speak with my wife? Will I perform a proof of life to make sure that at least she's safe and sound? Okay, would you immediately pick up a weapon, right? A baseball bat right beside you, to check how the kidnapper got in to begin with, right? Was it through an open window? Or will you then lock the windows right away? And this might sound scary, right? Would I ensure that no one else is in my house? Keep in mind, there's no way that I'm going to operate, all right, or do anything else without removing all possibilities of an imminent danger. Okay, so eventually when the police comes, we have probably seen this in your movies, they might bring in the negotiators. Is it to buy time, all right? While we try means and ways to locate my wife, will it then be easier to negotiate, right, when we have a better grasp of the situation? So putting this into context, there are multiple facets to a kidnap and ransom case. Likewise, ransomware response is exactly the same thing we're talking about. Taking ransom, data now instead of a physical person. So next, let me circle back to the perspective of cybersecurity. So to all, let me introduce to you the steps and options that you can take in ransomware breach, to deal with a ransomware breach. Right, many times, like I mentioned, we always think that ransomware response is it's just about decrypting the data, right? Restoring the data from the backup, or at the worst case, rebuilding the data. I just want to let you know, right, it's more than this. Please take a look at the end-to-end workflow here, right? And in the next couple of slides, I'll go into greater detail on what full end-to-end ransomware response look like, right? Of course, with the help of professional incident responders. So first and foremost, like I said, the first priority is to always ensure that your network is safe to prevent any follow-on attacks to your or further damages to your environment. There is no way that you'll be able to work to get your data back, right? If, imagine this, if the attacker is still pointing a gun at me, right? So the first task is always to remove all possibilities of imminent danger. That is always step one to IR, right? So upon notification, right, your incident response team will come in to work as fast as possible to quarantine the ransomware, recovering as much data as possible, as many digital assets as possible, and then attempt to decrypt using the wealth of keys that they may have, right? Usually the chances of using publicly available keys are very slim. Reverse engineering is not always successful, but even then, especially for the smaller firms, right, partial recoveries of data might be good enough to bring them back to resume basic business operations. Right, point to note, there should always be attempts to independently decrypt the data, right, before moving to the next steps, which is ransom payment, right? Concurrently, while the incident response is taking place, there can always be a separate professional negotiation track that takes place. Right, so let's move on to the next slide. So negotiation obviously is to have a sound, safe, direct communication channel with the attacker to buy time, to reduce the ransom ask, right? Point of note, many attackers may not be responsive to your messages, right? They might be conducting ransoms on many organizations at a given go, obviously, right? This may make negotiations very difficult for those who do not have extensive experience in dealing with criminals, dealing with attackers. So keep in mind, always have someone with strong, proven experience in this field to be able to communicate effectively and most importantly, safely, right? Trust me, they are always very impatient. Okay, and what is proof of life? How do I ensure that the attacker has keys to unlock the data? Okay, what if they were lying? What if I paid the ransom and I'm not going to get the data back, right? Keep in mind that's a possibility. So proof of life is about requesting the attacker to decrypt a portion of the data held captive to prove that they indeed have a working key. Okay, fun fact, some of the historical stats show that 1 in 5 ransom payers did not receive a working key to unlock their encrypted data. So like I said, the best strategy is always to elongate the timeline by delaying the payment deadline so that everyone has sufficient time to secure the network, reduce the requested payment amount, right? Attempt self-decryption, run proof of life, and only if necessary upon the client's instruction, facilitate payment. And obviously, this is going to be the last resort, right? The client will often think about the risk cost trade-off, all right, and then decide whether to make the ransom payment or not. So once the negotiation comes to an accord, right, the client will then make the decision, like I mentioned, whether to pay or not to pay the ransom. Of course, it's not as straightforward as just creating a wallet, buying crypto, selling crypto, right? In fact, fun fact time again, right? If ransom payments are made to sanction entities, right, there might be associated penalties of fines and jail time. So always ensure that your incident responders have the capacity for due diligence efforts throughout the entire decision-making process, working with international law enforcement partners alike to identify the threat actors and sanction entity statuses. You will definitely need to obtain expert advice to ensure that you're not liable for any regulatory breaches, right? Should you choose to pay the ransom, or should your client choose to pay the ransom? After the ransom payment is made, all right, and having your data decrypted by the response firm is not end game, okay? There are still means of ways to work with exchanges, KYT vendors, know your transaction vendors out there, partners out there, to pursue further investigative works. Right, we can then attempt to know where and who the payment was made to, and then we'll follow it out with a civil suit for possibilities of clawback of the lost monies. Okay, so to everyone, here you go. I present to you end-to-end ransomware response. Hope this helps broaden your context on what are your options out there. Okay, so let's move on to the next segment of my presentation, importance of risk transfer, right? As we all know, there's no magic pill, there's no silver bullet in cybersecurity. And now I'd like to elaborate on the importance of risk transfer. So what is risk transfer? What is it about risk transfer? Like I said, there's no 100%. Let's face it, every organization in the world has a non-zero chance of getting breached, right? You can have the best-in-class technology stacks. You can have the most comprehensive policies. You can have eyes on glass through a 24/7 SOC, right? But there are still instances where help is required, right? Due to advancements of using offensive AI for cyber attacks. So there are two primary means of risk transfer. Okay, obviously there is the option for incident response retainer, which I'm going to cover today, and obviously there's an option for you to subscribe to cyber insurance. Okay, for today's agenda, I'll be focusing on the former, right? The importance of having an IR retainer, all right? And as I shared the end-to-end response workflow earlier, most organizations will definitely not have the capacity to deal with a complex ransomware response themselves. So now, what is a retainer? This term might be foreign to many of you, right? What is a retainer? Essentially, it is a 12 months contract and a minimum that provides you with guaranteed support for IR and greatly reducing the lead time to response to a breach, right? So it's essentially a contract that you sign with a partner or IR firm to provide you with guaranteed support throughout a stipulated period of time. And why is it so important? Okay, think about this. First and foremost, when anyone gets breached, who will you be calling, right? Do you have access to professionals? Will you be calling your IT partner who will then be frantically getting help from a IR professional? Will you be Googling for help? Will you be calling your boss? Or will you be asking your colleague for help, right? It's going to be too late. You always want to get help in as early as possible, right? Golden hour, right? Any minute delayed will have detrimental impact. So having a retainer in place means guaranteed quality support. Without a retainer, when you go to an IR firm, they can choose to decline supporting you, right? Should they have no resources? And obviously, it's going to be way more expensive. Lastly, right, this might be transparent to many of you, but I'd like you to think about this as well. I've seen this happening many times. Enough to say this. On-demand support takes time. Just imagine this. You go to an IR firm for support on demand. What are they going to do for you, right? They're going to do a triage call. They're going to present you with a scope of work. They're going to present you with a quotation. They're going to present you with the terms and conditions, right? What are they going to do next? You'll be surprised, right? Even in the crisis, many organizations still have to follow through the atypical approval process, the long-drawn procurement process, getting the terms looked at, getting a lawyer review the contract, getting your CEO sign on the line. All this takes time, okay? So having a retainer in place removes all administrative steps away, right? Just think about this. How much time will it save you and how much earlier can your incident responders come help you contain the attack? All right, so that is all I have prepared, right? But before we wrap it up, right, and address the questions, I just have a sum up slide. But before we do that, let's have a quick glimpse of what CSA's recommendations for IR is, right? As part of the cybersecurity certification scheme, right, namely the Cyber Essential and Cyber Trust marks, this further reinforces the importance of IR, all right? And proper IR is not just about responding to attacks. It's also about being prepared, right? Having a sound plan, having a team to support you, having a framework in place to deal with attacks, learn, and improve collectively, okay? And last but not least, before we open up to the floor to answer any further questions, just a quick word on the organization that I'm representing. We are Blackpanda. We are a hyper-specialized digital forensics and incident response firm. Our mission is to democratize cyber resiliency through our recently launched IR1 special retainers, constructed specially for SMEs in mind, right? With SMEs in mind, to have them a fighting chance when they are faced with a cyber breach. right? That's Blackpanda for you. Thank you so much once again. I'm going to pass the time back to Arielle. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing. It's such an insightful session. I've learned quite a few things myself as well. It's nice to know that I'll always have ways to find my wife during such incidents. So yes, the current time is 10:43. Let's move on to the Q&A segment. I'm seeing a few questions. I'm glad that we've picked your interest on the topics that we've talked about today. So I'm just going to start choosing a few. Maybe I can throw a question to Privasec. So for a company starting from scratch, what would they look at first?
Okay, for a company starting from scratch, there are a few resources you are able to use. One of which is MES Cyber Hygiene Notice, which has a list of about, I think, 7 to 8 items there. Even though it's MES Cyber Hygiene Notice and is meant for our regulated FIs, that list does include the basic requirements that every organization should be looking at. So that's a good reference. Other than that, you also have CSA Cyber Essentials, which is essentially a program framework with a list of controls that you can implement. And the Cyber Essentials is meant to be a baseline type of standard. So the things inside there will generally be applicable to any organization. So I would say those two would be pretty good places to start. But of course, as always, if you are dealing with critical or more critical systems or sensitive data, then you have to put into context your business processes and deal with them accordingly. There was an additional question earlier around a risk assessment, cyber risk assessment template. Because I mentioned Cyber Essentials, I'm just going to answer this too. CSA and the Cyber Safe program has a few help packs that they have uploaded to the site. I put the link in the Q&A chat. Within these links, one of them is what we call a risk assessment template. But with that said, I have to add on to say that for the risk assessment templates, it needs to be contextualized. It will have generic risk categories there. You need to think about how it applies to your organization specifically. Hope that answers the question. Thanks, Arielle.
Okay, thank you. I've also noticed that Chun actually put in the link. So those of you who are interested to find out more, please do feel free to go over there to the chat box. Yes, and we also have another question. This one will be posed to Blackpanda. So Victor, will you please share some thoughts about this question? So how long does it typically take to deal with one a ransomware attack? Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that's a standard question. How long does it typically take with a ransomware case? There's no answer to that. It can range from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, right? Depending on the shape, size, severity of the attack. But I'd like to address this question in a different way, right? On how we can work around towards reducing the response time. When we deal with any form of attack, it's always about crisis management, crisis response. And for all crisis response in the world, it's all about these 4 key things, right? I call it triple AC, right? Access, authority, ability, and cooperation. I'm going to just talk briefly about each of these points and why is it so important in light of an IR. Okay, IR is all about crisis management, right? In fact, the speed and success of an IR not just depends on the capabilities of the responders. A lot of times depends on the clients as well. It's teamwork in crisis management. First and foremost, access, right? We need to be granted, the incident responders will need to be granted with the right access to the right systems so that we can deploy the right weapons, the right tools to help run the IR process, okay? So that is access, first key thing, always must be granted, always must be given. The second key thing is ability. Every organization in the world obviously has different ways of managing cybersecurity depending on the maturity of the company. All right, some may not have dedicated IT security managers. Of course, having a team of savvy IT professionals to work closely with the responders would be a great deal, will be helpful, right? But not everyone have a well-versed team, all right? And that potentially might mean extended periods for the responders to execute certain tasks or get certain information across from the client. Third key thing, authority. That being said, we always want the right authority in the room, right, to assist us. It may mean the head of IT, it might mean the CISO, the CIO, even the CEO. Having the right authority based on their experience in the room with us means getting things done quicker, faster, getting approvals way quicker, and making decisions way faster as well. Last but not least, whatever I mentioned won't make sense unless we get cooperation. Cooperation is key, right? Very, very importantly, cooperation between the victim and the responders is very important. Information flow, speed of execution, right? Decision-making processes are all affected by how well the teams cooperate, right? So that is just my angle to take incident response, crisis management as a whole, right? And all this impacts the response time. And Arielle, I realized there's another question. Oscar, thank you so much for your congratulations on the Q&A. We are looking at doubling our headcount in the next 12 months. So thank you so much. Like I mentioned, our goal, our mission for Blackpanda is to democratize incident response to serve SMEs and enterprises in the region. All right, and to do that, we'll have to ramp up accordingly to serve the regions. Thank you. Arielle, back to you.
Thank you, everyone. It's great learning. So yes, we still have some time. Maybe we can do like a quick one key takeaway or like a short liner to end off the presentation. So maybe we can start with Victor. Do you want to end off your presentation?
I see some other questions.
Oh, they're coming in. Yes. Right.
All right, so maybe let me address the question. Chris, thank you so much. Address the question from Gar. I assume that you're talking about IR plan review. All right, so the recommendation is to review it on the yearly basis. You don't have to do it on a quarterly or monthly basis because the IR plan framework do not need to be changed so frequently, right? IR plan is essentially steps A to Z for you to adhere to when you get breached, and when you need support for IR. So you will not be changing your infrastructure, you'll not be changing your personnel every too often. So once a year is the guidance that we always give. All right. I'm not sure what is your question on IR testing. I assume that is going to be your typical tabletop exercises. So first and foremost, my guidance to everyone out there is to at least have an IR plan in place. All right, that is fundamental. Once that plan is in place, all right, consider updating it on a yearly basis. People come and go, escalation matrix might change, your technology stacks might change, threat trends might change. So update that on a yearly basis and also consider running a tabletop exercise on a yearly basis as well. Having the best plan in the world is not going to help you if you do not put that into practice. Okay, so we call that tabletop exercises, all right, or cyber drill. Use the plan, work with a professional team to test out the scenarios, to run playbooks with you, to make sure that everyone in the organization is fully aware of what to do in light of a breach. That's all I have, Arielle. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Kyo, do you want to end off with a key takeaway? Do you have anything to share?
Well, I guess for the key takeaways, it would be around, I think for most of organizations today, having that framework for sustainable cybersecurity approach is essential. So one of those program frameworks I mentioned earlier would be pretty useful. Some of the items mentioned here, like such as your tabletop exercises, having the playbook and disaster recovery exercises, all these should be part of the plan, do, check, and model, especially items which need to be reviewed because of changes in organization, business processes, and so on. Right. Thanks, Arielle.
Nice. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for your time. Okay, so we really have a great crowd here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Please do make sure to send in your questions. We'll have our subject matter experts to reply to you. And thank you for being a great audience today. Extending our appreciation also to AISP, Blackpanda, and Privasec for such a successful webinar. So looking forward to more. Have a fantastic week and see you all very, very soon. Bye.